everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Coco and Daltz podcast. We're real people, and we do real reviews. I'm not Coco.
And I'm not Daltz.
And why were you shaking your head and looking stern at me when I was doing the intro? I've got intro voice on right now.
I usually look at you sternly.
That's true. Across the dinner table,
yes.
Past the salt, and you're like, no.
Yeah, I'm like, just give me the tofurkey and be quiet.
So, Tofurkey, what are we talking about in this particular episode of the podcast? I just called you Tofurkey.
Well, since today is the day before Thanksgiving in the U.S., not in Canada.
Or other places.
We are thankful for DisneyPlus's Andor, which just completed its 12-episode first season today, if you're listening to us in real time. It's the story of Cassian Andor, who was last seen in Rogue One. He is part of the Rebel Alliance, played by Diego Luna. This season takes place 5 years before the events of Rogue One, so he has not been vanquished by the Death Star yet.
So is this like Rogue half?
Yes, Rogue
0.25?
Quarter pounder. Yeah.
So quarter pounder.
Yeah. So it's the story of how it's an origin story. Diego Luna reprises his role as Cassian Andor. Forrest Whitaker reprises his Rogue One role as Saw Gerrera, a militant insurgent who helps the Rebel Alliance. So there's a lot of characters in Andor. It's a vast universe within the Star Wars universe. There's lots of plots, subplots, etc. And we can definitely get into all that, but some of the other main characters are Luthen Rael, an antiquities dealer / rebel underground funder, played by Stellan Skarsgård.
/ middle-aged lesbian.
Well, we'll get to that.
Okay. Sorry, I took your joke, but it was just so good. I had to...
And now I can't remember who else. Oh, Andy Serkis plays Kino Loy, who's a prisoner. Andor meets when they are building parts for... Something that you could probably guess.
No, you couldn't guess.
Yeah, there's lots going on in Andor. So, and we can definitely talk about the many plots and subplots.
So the thread here is Andor and his various adventures.
Yeah, it's basically how he goes from just being a regular everyday guy to being kind of the cold-blooded rebel operative killer that we see in Rogue One.
Making unwise decisions along the way.
Yeah, he's not wise to the ways of insurgents quite yet.
So the first episode, one of the very first moments in the whole story that is Andor, is him shooting some guys that he probably shouldn't have shot. And then everything just cascades from there. Yeah. So it's kind of like one of these stories where if you hadn't have done that, then you probably wouldn't be running from the Empire all this time.
Yeah, so the inciting incident is, well, let me backtrack. When he was a small child, he was not on the planet of Ferrix, which is where he was largely raised and which is where quite a bit of the action in Andor takes place. I believe his home planet is called Kenari. A Republic, because this is back in the days before the Empire, a Republic ship crashes, and when his adoptive parents come to Kenari to scavenge, he gets left behind, and they don't want to leave him to nefarious hands, so they take him. So there's, in the first episode or two especially, there's a lot of themes of colonialism and white saviorism. You know, this young native boy is being taken by, Marva Andor, played by Fiona Shaw, who's a white lady, and her partner, who is not white, but they take him away from his home planet for a better life, but,
But away from his culture,
but away from his culture, his family, and he does have a lot of friends on Ferrix and stuff, but he's still... So the inciting incident, this is a long ways to get back to that, is he's now looking for his sister. He goes to another planet because he got a hot tip that that's where she's at. She is supposedly not there, but he gets jumped by a couple guys. He ends up killing them. The subcontracted security company on that planet gets a bee in their bonnet trying to track him down, and it turns into a whole thing where now he's being tracked by Imperial security forces. He tries to sell some of that Canary looted booty that his adoptive parents stole to fund his getaway. That's how he crosses paths with Stellan Skarsgård, who sets him up on a prison break / heist on another planet. Yeah, so there's a lot going on.
So to
Andor.
me, so there's 12 episodes, which you
Yeah.
mentioned. This is on DisneyPlus, obviously. 12 episodes. To me, it's broken up into thirds. So 1/3 is him trying to get away from being on the lam, because
Right.
he shot the guys. And then the middle third is the heist movie where they're trying to break into the Republic's dam thing.
Yeah.
And they're trying to blow it up and change the world for good. And then the other third is a prison escape movie.
Because he, through a
He gets-
series of unfortunate events after the heist at the Imperial Fort Knox, he manages to escape, but then he, through a series of unfortunate events, ends up in an Imperial prison making parts for the Death Star, and that's where he runs into Andy Serkis, and then there's a prison break, and
So I'm wondering if the series of unfortunate events that lead to his incarceration, I wonder if that was a statement about racial profiling, because there are a lot of statements in this series. There are a lot of, like you said, a lot of things about colonialism. There's classism. There's a lot of things like that. So it felt a little weird. It was like he was jaywalking, and the next thing you know, he's like spending the rest of his life in jail. It was one of those kind of things.
right, and there's also, I mean, we have that in this country too. I mean, there's like the school to prison pipeline, like kids, they play hooky for one day and now they're in prison because we need that sweet slave labor to make the country go round. So, it's probably a commentary on that as well.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Genevieve O'Reilly has a large role as young Mon Mothma.
So the whole Mothma
I can't believe I forgot Mon Mothma.
storyline, she's the senator, right? And she's
Yes.
like sort of funding the rebellion, but
Yes.
not really. And there's that whole storyline to me was kind of unnecessary.
Wow.
I felt it just bogged everything down. Like the action when Andor was in there. Okay, so let me back up. There's not enough Andor in this movie, or in this series, I should say. It feels like he's the thread line, but we only touch on him like for maybe a third of each one of the episodes. And then the other 2/3 are the governor, the senator, and then like Stellan Skarsgård. And like there's so many characters in this series that, like you mentioned, that it's hard to keep track. Like I remember, so we binge watched a bit of it and then we paused and then we watched some more of it and then we finalized it in the last couple of days. And there were times it was like, oh yeah, that guy. Like the poor man's Kyle MacLachlan, the guy who was with he was the security company that got, he totally got ripped a new one because he went off the reservation, so to speak, and tried to get Andor back from this whole thing, this whole murder to begin with. Like that was an unnecessary storyline too, I think, because we just like he didn't really pull the plot along. Like he moved it along in a little bit, but he didn't need to keep going in this story. Like he could have just faded away.
He did fade away for a few episodes. He was very prominent in
the beginning.
and
Yeah.
then he faded away, and then the last couple episodes he came back. So I think he is going to play a more prominent role in season 2.
Yeah.
There is going to be a second season. This is only going to be a 2-season show. It's going to go right into the events of Rogue One after the second season. So that guy, his character's name is, I believe, Cyril.
See, this is why you do the summaries, because I can't remember anybody's names.
And then he was an employee of like the subcontracted planetary security company
Right.
that went after Andor for the murder of those 2 guys who jumped him. And then
But then he loses his job.
yeah,
and has to
he
move
loses
in with
his
his mother.
job and he moves in with his mom, and that was a great relationship.
And that was also a universal theme too.
And then there's another, the ISB supervisor named Deidre Miro, I believe played by Denise Goff, whatever. They kind of join forces-ish at the end of episode 12, so I believe those two are going to play a large role in season 2, as well as Stellan Skarsgård, because the cliffhanger, quote unquote, is Andor telling Luthen Rael, "Kill me or take me with you." So
I think we know what's going to happen because there is a Rogue One.
Yeah, because Rogue One exists in the future. So
as you mentioned at the end, I was like, "This is not resolved at all," and you're like, "Well, it sort of is because we know that
we know he lives.
We know he's in the movie,
right?
Unless the whole movie is a dream sequence or something
right,
like
totally.
that.
It's like Bobby Ewing.
Yeah,
like wakes up in the shower and
Whoops.
I'd watch Diego Luna in the shower. I'm not going to lie.
Now stop. So
what did you think then of?
I already offered my opinion on some of it, so you offer your opinion on some of it.
Oh, I freaking loved it.
Did you really?
I loved everything about it. I wish this was like a 24 episode season.
Wow.
Like seriously, I loved the Mon Mothma parts.
You did, really?
I tend to like political thrillers, I think, more than you do.
Yeah. It felt kind of Games of Thronesy to me.
Yeah, I love that where somebody says something and there's 8 million subtext to it. Like, I loved it. Like, and you could feel the tension. Like they're walking that, she's in the Imperial Senate and she's funding the rebellion. Like she's going to die if she gets found out. So you can just feel her walking that tightrope the whole time. So and she marries her daughter off at the end, like not wanting to, but for the greater good, because now she's going to secure funding, like further funding, because her accounts are being watched. So I loved the Mon Mothma parts. I loved Stellan Skarsgård. I thought he was great. The action sequences were freaking fantastic. The Fort Knox heist, that whole episode, I was just on the edge of my seat the whole time. The prison break, I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. Like there was no episode that I thought was lesser in quality than any of the other episodes. Like that was one of my issues with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like overall, I liked that series because it's Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen is back and yay, but it was uneven. There were like some episodes that made me have like 47 orgasms. And then there were some episodes that were just okay, and the storylines, were okay. Liked them, didn't love them. This one, every single thing, I loved it. I loved every single thing about this.
Wow. So high praise indeed. I will say that having said all the things that I said earlier, this is definitely the best one of all the Disney Star Wars series. Like it's better than Mandalorian. It's better than the Book of Boba Fett. Better than Obi-Wan Kenobi was a high bar. I think it's better than that. I think as I mentioned to you, Coco, when we were watching it in the early going, it's like, what a difference good acting makes.
Right.
And what a difference, like even if the dialogue is not tremendously better, and it is a little bit in spots, but it's sort of Star Wars-y in its dialogue quality. But the acting, man, it was just so much better. Like Diego Luna doesn't do a lot of acting. He just kind of looks, very, very surly and smoky and, doesn't really do a lot of acting, but he's really good. And Stellan Skarsgård is really good. And a lot of the actors are really good.
And we're not even mentioning a lot of the non-marquee name actors. Right. Like there are so many supporting players who are just fantastic.
Exactly. And that was kind of what I was going to as well, no, that's okay, is that in the cheesy Star Wars stuff, like the secondary characters are like, that person is clearly acting. And whereas in this one, I had the sense that everybody had really good acting chops. Now, most of them are from the UK based on their accents. So
there were a lot of Scots in this series.
Right. I was like, this is the best British-made movie ever made, right. Or British-made series. And that made me think, too, is like, what is it about the people in the UK who just love science fiction? They just love the science fiction. It's a culture that's got such a rich history, and yet they love science fiction. Anyway, but I agree with you. Like the tension was amazing. The heist part of it and the breakout of prison were fantastic. The tension was really good. And I will pay this a compliment, and it's not going to sound like a compliment, but this series did not feel like a Star Wars series to me at all. It felt like it was gritty.
It was much grittier.
It was dark in places, like darker, not dark as in, some of the darker movies you've ever seen, but dark for Disney and dark for Star Wars. And, Diego Luna is not exactly a likable character in some ways. He's killing guys and, you see a lot of shooting and death and guys getting blown away and stuff like that, and not in the Disney Star Wars way, whereas people get killed off camera or like the stormtroopers are shooting at cans and missing them in the desert. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it was a completely different vibe. And the home planet of Diego Luna's character, Ferrix or whatever it was, you could tell that that was like a working class planet. They seemed like they were miners. I don't think there are any showers on that planet because everybody was pretty nasty looking in every scene. But nonetheless, I agree with you. Like this was a real wild ride, and I enjoyed a lot of it. I didn't come out of an episode like I have in previous, like Mandalorian or Boba Fett, and I was like, that didn't do anything for me. That particular episode didn't do anything for me. Whereas in this series, I was engaged from the get-go.
I don't think I mentioned this. Most of the episodes were right around 45-ish minutes long. The finale was 57, and the last 8 minutes of that is probably credits, but none of these episodes felt like their actual length.
Right.
Right. I wasn't sitting there looking. Sign. Yeah, I wasn't sitting there looking at my watch like, oh, we still got 20 minutes left. Oh, 57 minutes. There were probably the last 3 episodes. We looked at each other and we were like, it's over already? Yeah. Like, what?
And it was kind of the opposite almost in terms of when you look at your phone, sometimes you're like, oh, how much more have I got to do with this? But then you look at your phone and you're like, oh, there's not much left of this.
Right.
Like it was the opposite. So full marks to the team that did this. This was not a Jon Favreau led production.
It's Tony Gilroy.
Yeah, and you can feel that because the Favreau, he did Mandalorian and Boba Fett and all those sort of, I believe.
I think Dave Filoni might have done Boba Fett, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, and there's
they're kind of the same person.
Yeah, they're sort of the same camp, right?
Yeah, totally.
Whereas this felt like it was, like I said, it felt like it was not necessarily an independent production, but certainly gritty Star Wars, and I really liked it. Like I read some early reviews of it. I caught even though I don't like to look at reviews, I saw the display text sometimes on Twitter and such, and people are saying it was like Blade Runner and it's like Alien. It's like, no, I don't think it was that. I don't think it was that kind of gritty and that kind of dark, but it certainly was on the Star Wars spectrum. It was certainly closer to those than it was to like the shiny Death Star and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, Rogue One is my favorite Star Wars movie that Disney has done, and that's a dark movie.
Yeah.
Especially that end scene with Vader just killing dozens of rebels, after, the Death Star plans get beamed off of Scarif before Andor dies. And
wait, what?
And I mean that is a dark scene, but that is just iconic. I watch that scene on YouTube at least once a month. I watched it a couple times today in anticipation of the Andor finale.
Wow,
and
look
so
at you.
This is
so that's what you're doing when you're like
I'm like, I gotta work.
I gotta work, and then you close your laptop really fast when I come upstairs.
Right,
like, totally. How's it going, eh? And you're like, oh.
just working.
I'm doing research.
And this was much more in line with the tone of Rogue One than The Force Awakens or The Rise of Skywalker, which was just kind of all over the place, right? So yeah, so Rogue. I don't know what it says about me that Rogue One is my favorite Disney Star Wars movie, and Andor is now my favorite Disney Star Wars live action series.
I would agree with you on both of those. Like I really liked Rogue One as well. I've only seen it the one time with you.
Oh, we gonna watch it,
so we can watch it again.
Yeah, we're
maybe
totally
have a
watch
greater
it
appreciation for it as well. Now that I have a little bit of backstory. And another thing to add to, I'm a geek for this kind of stuff, but the sound was really good. The sets were spectacular. Like I'm at a point in my life right now where I'm like, how much did they spend on that set, and how much of it did it go in the landfill after they used it?
Oh no!
Because some of those sets were amazing. Like the prison felt very much like a 2001 homage with the space station, with all brightly lit white and some metallic, but it was just fantastic.
What's that George Lucas movie that he did back in the 70s?
Yeah, THX 1138.
Yeah, it was definitely like an homage to that for sure.
Well, and that was an homage to 2001 because Kubrick, they were peers at that time, right?
Yeah.
So that was, again, the sets were amazing, and it was a very I know I sort of criticized the Senator storyline, but the stark contrast between those two worlds was evident, and it was apparent, and it was intentional. So the Senator is having these very high class dinners, and everybody's all dressed up, and they kind of look like like samurais.
It was slightly jarring that there's a bunch of white people walking around dressed like samurai. Like, I don't know, what the culture of like Chandrila is, but I'm like, ooh, is that the best costuming we can come up with for a bunch of white people? Like, I don't know.
But like, to my point is that it was shiny and new and glorious and luxurious. And then you go into the world of where Diego Luna and his characters are, and everything was just subterranean. And I found it interesting too that the selection of colors for the wardrobes, they're yellows and the camouflage greens and stuff like that, was a very unusual, and some reds and things like that. I don't know if you noticed that as much as I did, but it was also, again, it felt very much not like Disney, or not like Star Wars Disney. It felt like a very unusual take on the future, or the alternative reality, or whatever happens to be. So I give full marks right across the board. I really enjoyed it a lot, and I'm not saying that because you love it. and I'm not revising my mark at all. I stand by my point about the Senator story. And maybe that was because there were a lot of low talkers in that, and I was kind of having trouble following. I got the basic gist that there was political shenanigans going on there. But I could have, it's like a stark contrast to me. It was sort of the comparison of, okay, here we're watching a hockey game. Okay, and now let's go to a city hall meeting.
Right, totally.
And it's like these two things. It's like, oh, kill me. It's just because it was so stark, because the tension and the action, like you mentioned, of those other scenes were just so off the top, amazing, great, that it compared to a bunch of white people standing around having a meeting.
Yeah,
it was a little bit not as thrilling.
I will say the one jarring thing for me was Mon Mothma's old flame / current confidant from Chandrila, who is helping her obtain shady funding for her rebel activities, looks exactly like celebrity chef Jeffrey Zakarian. Because I used to watch a lot of the Food Network.
Did you really?
I did, yeah. And he, like, every time he showed up, I'm like, is he gonna make an omelet now? Like, what's in his samurai outfit? Like, is he gonna like
chop up some sushi or
right?
something?
Like, So.
See, that wasn't going through my mind, so I'm glad that we watched it together. See, this is the analysis you can't get just anywhere, listener.
Right.
So, 26 letters. What are you offering up here, Coco?
A. Giving it an A.
Wow, not an A+. Maybe leaning toward?
Yeah, I might be leaning toward an A+, yeah.
You could give an A+.
Have I given anything an A+ before?
I don't think so.
I don't know.
Other than Our Love.
Well, besides that.
Yeah. I would, and so Stream, I would imagine, absolutely commit to the 12 episodes, yeah.
Yeah, and my thought originally was for us to, because it's a holiday weekend in the States, like knock all of them out this weekend, but Daltz did not want to do that, but you could very easily do that, because we actually ended up watching like I think 9
in a row.
Yeah. And we were like, oh no, there's 3 more. We were like angry that we didn't have those final 3, like they hadn't dropped yet. It only dropped once a week. They're doing the linear thing, which angers me.
Yeah.
So,
but now you can watch them all.
That's an F for the linear.
F for fail.
Yes.
I do admit that I'm not a big binge watcher because my ass gets flat pretty fast. So I don't want to do that. But I think that this would be the kind of series that you could do that for the reasons you mentioned, but also because there's so many characters that if you go a couple of weeks between episodes, you might, and there are recaps, of course, you can watch the recap. But there was, again, you might be better off if you watch like 2 or 3 in a row and then the next night and watch 2 or 3 or that kind of thing, because you lose track of some of the storylines otherwise. I would give it a 7.5 out of 10.
Wow.
So that's up from my usual 7.
Yeah. And
I would absolutely recommend it as a watch. I think if you're coming to this podcast and you're like, wonder what I should watch on Disney right now that's Star Warsy, I would watch this one and don't bother with some of the other ones, The Mandalorian and Boba Fett. They're kind of disappointing, even though had a lot of promise. So I would definitely watch this one.
Well, Mandalorian first season was really good. Mandalorian second season was...
Yeah. It's just the acting,
Okay.
though. Like, now that we have those in the rearview mirror and we have Obi-Wan and we have Andor ahead of us, like, if you were to go back and watch those, you'd be like, the acting.
Yeah, like the entire series of Andor, and then like especially the final 2 episodes of Obi-Wan, where it's Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen just putting on like a master class of acting.
Yeah.
You know, every minute of those episodes, like those are some high bars to clear. So whatever comes next in the DisneyPlus Star Wars universe has got a lot to live up to.
What is next? Do you know what's next?
Oh, I think it's Tales of the Jedi. I don't think that's live action though.
Is it Origin of Chewbacca?
Oh, that'd be great.
Just nothing but him going,
Oh, the levels are off the chart when you just did that.
I backed up from the mic, too. I don't know why.
Yeah.
So anything else to add, Coco, about Andor?
No.
And it's not like and/or, like, grammatical terms. It's Andor, the guy's name.
Right.
Right. So on that note, we should close the podcast.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
And for those who don't celebrate Happy Thanksgiving, Happy Thursday in November. So for another episode of the podcast, I'm not Coco.
And I'm not Dalt.